So what is it with autistic people and loving Japan? Someone asked this on my YouTube channel and I decided to make a video because I have some thoughts about it. And I've also read But You Don't Look Autistic at All by Bianca Toeps. It's her memoir and she's also a Japanophile just like me. So I think she also has some insights into this. So the first point I should make is that many autistic people love foreign countries and love traveling and learning about other cultures. There's a really good reason for this, and it has to do with the uncanny valley. Basically, the uncanny valley, say if you're talking about robots, is like a robot that's so close to being human, but there's something just a little bit off about it. And that makes people feel very uncomfortable when they're looking at this thing that's trying to be human but isn't entirely successful. It activates this automatic fear response. So think the replicants in Blade Runner. However, if something has some human traits, but it's not trying to be exactly like a human, for example, Baymax from the Disney series and the movie, it's this big, white, cuddly, cloud-like robot that you can tell right away is a robot, but he's very sweet and kind and he can talk and help people out and do all these human things. So Baymax is seen as cute and friendly because we're able to read human traits onto him, but he's not trying to fool us at all. So autistic people, when they're in their own countries, they're more like a replicant, but when they go to a foreign country, especially if they really look out of place, then they kind of turn into Baymax, where they're no longer seen as this thing that's trying to pass as a normal person and not quite getting it right, but they're more this cute, different, kind of lovable thing that's quirky because it's different. And so when autistic people go to a foreign country, they find themselves being given the benefit of the doubt for the first time, often in their lives. Like suddenly everything they do that's a bit wrong or weird or off or breaks a social taboo is just put down to them being a foreigner. Like, oh, of course you didn't get it the first time. We'll tell you what you're supposed to be doing because you're just a foreigner. You're so quirky. You're so exotic. Instead of like, you said you didn't know this, but you should know this. You should know this by your age. You're really weird that you don't know this. In fact, I think you're just making up that you don't know this, and you're actually gaslighting me because you're a jerk. Like, obviously, you'd prefer to be Baymax. Autistic people also have a really big advantage when it comes to being a good foreigner in a different country. Mainly that they're very curious a lot of the time, and they also tend to be very humble. So if they are in a new place, they're more likely to be, oh, that's different, that's cool, I want to know about that. Why is it that way? Why are people doing it that way when in my country they're doing it this other way? Which is actually more efficient? I don't know, but I want to try. Rather than having an immediate reaction of, that's different, therefore that's weird and wrong and it makes me uncomfortable. Autistic people are more likely to have trouble with the anxiety that comes with being in an unpredictable situation, rather than just the culture shock in itself. We're usually the weirdos. Why should we be judgmental of something that's a little different? So those are things about foreign countries in general. When it comes to Japan in particular, are autistic people more likely to miss the subtle snubs that they might get from native Japanese people? Because Japan is like a very hierarchical culture and it tends to be very subtle when it comes to social interactions. I would say yes. I would say, yeah, you're probably like a bull in the china shop. but so are most foreigners. But I don't think that's always a big problem to like accidentally get snubbed by Japanese people because you're breaking rules right and left, because the rules are more subtle, but the snubs are more subtle too. So what you don't know can't hurt you, right? I mean, in some cases it could be really bad, but in other cases it might just go completely over the autistic person's head. So it kind of depends on individual experience and what kind of people you're hanging out with. Another thing that autistic people might like about Japan specifically is the amount of high-tech options. And not in the business world, because they're really low tech there and they still want you to fax things for no good reason. But in places like restaurants and shopping malls and places where you hang out, autistic people often do enjoy the idea that you can use a machine to do something or press a button to do something. One good example is restaurants that have a ticketing system where instead of talking to a human at the entrance, you go up to this little machine, kind of like a vending machine, and you press the button for the meal you want. You do have to read a little bit of Japanese or hope that there's pictures. And then you select your meal, you pay for it, you select all your options, and then you go and sit down, and like magic, your meal shows up. It just comes to you, and you don't have to go through this gauntlet of social interaction in order to get a food. And social interaction can be especially fraught if you're not comfortable with the language and culture. So just having that option, knowing that you can just kind of go in and be like, doop, doop, doop. Okay, I got my thing, and now it's all set, and it's just gonna come to me. Yeah, that's kind of nice. That's something that I enjoy too. And even in the States, I'm always going to the little computer screens at McDonald's if they're working, because I just hate having to repeat myself to a human and argue for what I want. However, one downside to Japan and like the shopping culture especially that I noticed there is that there tends to be so much noise in certain stores. Like you go into a grocery store and in the fish section, they just have this annoying fish jingle that keeps playing over and over and over again. And so like I kind of have to like run there, grab my fish quickly and run out because it gets stuck in my head. And I don't know why they have to play music in the fish section to tell people that they have fish. They obviously have fish. And there's a store called, I believe, Tutuana, that has really nice like socks and arm covers. I like the vibe of the shop, but weirdly, like in all their stores, they play ABBA, like only ABBA songs. And I don't know why they do that. It has really nothing to do with the kind of fashion products they sell. And when I'm just shopping there, it is kind of nice. It's like I go in and I get to listen to my ABBA. But I wonder what it's like for the employees who have to actually work there. You must hear the same song day after day after day. There's only so many times you can listen to Dancing Queen and not want to just murder the sound system. Yeah, I don't know how people stand it. It just is like a screwdriver, just into my ear. It's nasty. Another thing that helps autistic people in Japan is their set phrases and their clear hierarchies, because they usually are a little bit less shy about telling you who's the boss, who like you have to pay attention to on the social ladder at work and things like that, and just telling you, okay, this is the way you do it. You fill out this form, get to that person, and if that person says no, then you can't do it. And they're a little bit less likely to rely on a supposedly flat system where actually it's just the most popular person controlling everything, and you better not piss that person off. They tend to be a little bit less shy about, here's the rules, you need to follow them. And especially if they think you're a foreigner who's likely to mess it up, which in my case is usually accurate. As far as the set phrases, Japan has social phrases just like America, and they tend to be always the same. Like, you can, when you see someone for the first time that day, you say Ohayo, and when you see them for the second time through the last time, you say Otsukaresama or Otsukaresama desu. And when you leave the house, you say Itekimasu, and the person you're saying goodbye to says Itterashai, and when you come home, you say Tadaima, and the other person will say Okaeri. And yeah, you can just kind of go on with that. And there's also a lot of aizuchi, which is like little phrases or more like sounds you make to let someone know that you're listening, like like just little things like that to express like surprise or that you're understanding and things like that. So when you're first starting off, you can actually get pretty far in a conversation and through many social interactions with just knowing like a lot of phrases that are repeated almost exactly the same way every single time. And it just takes off that mental load when you're going through your day. Like just being able to walk down the hallway at work being like, Otsukaresama, Otsukaresama, and I just need to repeat that. I don't have to think of an answer to how are you. I'm not going to get a curveball thrown with a random question from someone and not know like how social to be or how much to engage before they're like already across the room. It's just, it's kind of cool. Like, I kind of like just not having to think about it. No one, according to neurotypicals, no one like really cares what you're saying anyways when you answer how are you. So I think why not just love it down? Like, let's just like have like some random sounds that we just say to each other when we acknowledge each other during the day. I think that would be more efficient. Another thing autistic people might like is punctuality, as long as they're not also ADHD, which is a whole other can of worms. I'm very sorry for your punctuality struggles, because it can be a struggle. But when a Japanese person says, let's meet at the station at 10 o'clock, that means one very specific thing. That means at 10 o'clock at the station, what are you going to see? You're going to see us meeting each other, ready to go, completely prepared. We're not going to meet there at 10:05. We're not going to meet there at 10:15. We're not going to wait for the confirmation text that morning before we actually decide if we're meeting there or not. Like, if I tell you to be there, I don't care if you have to get there 15 minutes early and browse through the convenience store until we're actually ready. Just do whatever you need to do to make that happen. Like, 10 o'clock means 10 o'clock means 10 o'clock. And if something goes wrong, you better have an explanation. And just not having to think of through the different meanings of time for different people and social groups and just be like, okay, it's 10, now I know, is also saves me a lot of effort and a lot of confusion. Nothing's worse than having that one friend where you never know like if they're going to actually be there when they show up at the like correct time, or if you're going to go to the place, wait around for 10 minutes, text them, and then be like, oh yeah, I'm on my way, 20 more minutes. It's like, okay, I just amused myself. Anyway, specificity is good. Another thing that can help autistic people is Japan's group mentality. What I mean by group mentality in this case is the tendency of Japanese people to feel viscerally uncomfortable if someone is being left out of a group. I mean, if they're not jerks, if they're already decent people. In America, it's often the case that you need to fight your way into a group if you're not one of the people usually included. I've definitely hung out with groups of Americans where like I'll just sit there and sit there and sit there and no one looks at me and no one talks to me and I never get to say anything. And it's just this really weird feeling where it's like, here I am. I'd say something, but every time I start, somebody interrupts me. I guess I'll just slink off. And I think like Americans will definitely see me, but they'll just assume that I don't want to be in the group, because if I wanted to be, I would be, right? Right? Or they're secretly hoping that I'm going to leave and they don't have to be the bad guy by doing something rude. Like they'll be like, oh yeah, like I guess she like didn't really want to talk to us because she just sat there for a while, got interrupted a few times, and then after an hour she left. Weird. What a strange person. What a strange, creeping lurker of a person. I hope she doesn't come back. Whereas I've often had the experience of being with a group of Japanese people where if I don't say anything for too long, like someone will look at me or smile at me or ask me a question and kind of like draw me into the group. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they like me in particular. Like for them, it's just the awkwardness of someone just sitting there on the outside being ignored outweighs the awkwardness of talking to the person that maybe no one wants to talk to. I don't know, I think that's kind of a good thing. Like a lot of times when I see someone who isn't being included, then I do try to like be the one that talks to them. I want to go back to high context cultures or high context and autistics, because I think there is this perception that autistics just don't do well with high context cultures or hints, but I don't think that's always the case. I think certainly with people who just don't have an easy time getting a read on social cues, sure, like that can be very common. But I think for people that do notice social cues, they just have to put in that effort, that extra mental effort to catalog them and figure out what they are, especially for autistics who have a special interest in psychology or human interaction or culture or writing or anything like that. They can actually do pretty well with high context interactions. One aspect of neurotypical culture that confuses autistics is the tendency to exaggerate or to say things just to fill the air without having any particular meaning behind them. And I think neurotypical people don't notice that those exaggerated interactions also have their own kind of high context. What autistic people can be very good at is noticing things that are said and assuming that they're being said for a reason and remembering them later. Autistic people can have more of a tendency to just not talk if they don't feel like they have anything to contribute and not feel the need to fill that space, or to state their own feelings very literally and therefore not overplay them. In fact, maybe downplay them. For example, an autistic person might hear their friend complaining like, cucumbers, like, I don't know why people think they're so refreshing. Like, to me, they're just kind of tasteless and soggy. And take that as like a literal important statement. Go into the cataloging mode, like, oh, friend hates cucumbers. And then 6 months later, when the autistic person is getting their friend's poke, to get one for the cucumber hater and be like, here's your poke. I made sure to ask for no cucumbers on it because you hate cucumbers. And then the friend will be like, what? How did you remember that I hated cucumbers? And the autistic person's just like, because you said you hated cucumbers? And some people might classify that as a high context interaction, or as a hint, or as not even a hint, like something much more subtle, because like the friend never said, don't ever buy me cucumbers, or remember this information for later. But for the autistic person interpreting that literally, it was a natural follow-up to say, Well, if they hate cucumbers, I'm not going to get them cucumbers. That would just be really mean. So I don't know, is that a high context read, or is that very literal? Or is that taking things literally, but also taking the time to notice what people say and what their preferences are, and then building future interactions based on that? But I think that sometimes Japan can be a little bit on that autistic level, like it's some really high level of interaction. People might say the opposite of what they mean, or might just not say what they mean because they don't want to trouble people with their problems. But they also might make some smaller observations, and if you notice them and you don't just like steamroll over the person, then you can be seen as polite. I don't know, I have trouble knowing what's a hint and what's just a statement without a lot of fluff. Because sometimes things that I think are incredibly literal, other people think are hints. And it's true, I don't always know when people are saying the opposite of what they really mean, or they're saying one thing, but like the understood meaning is supposed to be something else. But sometimes, just because I do tend to be less of a exaggerate my own perceptions, exaggerate my own confidence kind of person, it leads me to pick up on things that other people think are subtle, but I don't think are subtle at all. And finally, I think a reason that autistic people can really connect with Japanese culture is because autistic people basically across the board employ some level of masking. And masking is also a part of Japanese culture. They call it tatemae, and it's about like having a special face that you use for various social interactions to just make things go smoothly. And it's understood that this is not necessarily your real personality. It might be an aspect of it, but there's things you just don't do in public, or you don't do in certain situations because it's not appropriate. And because of that, if they see a foreigner is trying to mask, trying to learn proper social interactions for different contexts, they'll kind of think that's cool. Like, hey, you kind of get this. You kind of are learning culture. Like, what a cute little foreigner. Again, with the Baymax thing. All countries mask. All of them mask across the board, just in different ways. But America puts so much emphasis on being yourself, being authentic, not learning things by route, not learning things to fit in, but just doing them naturally because you're naturally cool, you're naturally professional, you're naturally mature. You've learned what you should know. If American people find out you're masking, there's this automatic suspicion, like, hey, you're not supposed to do that. Like, you're lying to me. You should like all the stuff I like and dress how I dress and like behave the way I behave because that's subjectively correct and right and cool and the way everyone should behave. Even though next year we're going to do a completely different fashion and different stuff is going to be popular for no good reason. But you should just pick up on what everyone else likes or you're a weirdo. Like, Americans are so suspicious of effort. It's really weird. So I feel like if you're a foreigner in Japan and people see you researching different grammatical forms to use in different situations, researching the background on something, consciously imitating the way your friends move and behave and speak and sort of fit in with the culture, like, they'll actually applaud that effort and reward it because they sort of get what that's like. It's not a taboo to have to learn things and learn social practices consciously as much in Japan as I think it is in America, because they sort of assume everyone's doing that all the time, which everyone is always doing it all the time. But in America, we're not supposed to admit we're doing it for some reason. And also putting efforts into doing nice, considerate things for people, to observe what they say and what their preferences are, and things that might go wrong, and to make preparations based on those, to show up with water for your friend on a hot day because you were worried that we might not have water and we need water, or to remember that your friend has to get up early the next day and be conscious of that and ask them how late they want to stay out and what time they need to get their train. And like remembering little detail. I feel like I don't understand social interactions that are based on showing you don't care for the person, that are in this sort of like too cool for you kind of neggy vein where you show up late and you talk about yourself and you don't act too impressed by whatever the other person does, and you show off the cool things that you know about, like the restaurants and the bars, and force them to follow your lead and stuff like that. And you don't text them back right away, and you're not consistent in your communication, and you act like you have other friends, or you're super busy with work stuff and you have so much more going on in your life. And I could just make a whole video about that, but I don't really get it. So I think in Japan there is more pressure to be perfect and to get things right all the time, like to always be that considerate person, to always, when you're cooking, make the meal flawlessly and cute and delicious, to always be showing up on time. That can chip away at your self-esteem, especially if you're a foreigner who just, everything's harder. Like, I keep messing up. I can't make it delicious and cute. You're gonna have to choose one or the other. And it can be really tough, but then I think that freedom to let your attention to detail and your respect and consideration for other people just go wild is also weirdly really freeing. And I'm grateful for the things I learned while I lived in Japan, and I think that learning some new things also helped me be a more authentic version of myself and a more considerate person. So I think this video is probably going to turn out way too long, but those are some of my thoughts on autistic people in Japan, and hopefully people have enjoyed watching my video. Thank you!